What's the worst example of personal hygiene you've ever seen from someone? Ugh, I lived with a guy in college, large house with about 30 occupants, who would wash his clothes, which consisted of him shoving as many clothes as would fit in the washer and not add laundry soap because it was too expensive. So, he ended up with clothes that smelled like mildew and bow instead of just bow. Then he'd put that mess in the dryer and the whole basement smelled like warm mildew and bow. It was sickening. The house manager finally spoke to him. Didn't work. We started buying bulk laundry detergent out of our house funds for all house occupants to use. That sort of worked, but he still shoved too much stuff the washer. Finally the house manager actually showed him that he had to leave a little room so the clothes could be agitated in the washer to get them clean, and he finally understood. You'd think the ridiculously stinky clothes would be a clue, but I'm guessing he had to be nose blind at that point. My parents moved house in 1990 to a place where the previous owners had been very heavy smokers, but had recently quit. The wallpaper in the living room was a beige, almost a coffee latte color when they first went to view the property. On the day they got the keys they were shocked. The previous occupants had taken their pictures, artwork, and clock with them, and the spaces left behind on the wallpaper were quite a vivid shade of pink, and the contrast to the brown was astonishing. This guy and his family didn't like to shower, and they all had food stains all over their clothing, and the father smelled like he crapped himself, smelled like pee, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is he had food stuck in his hair and maggots crawling in it. Literally the guy smelled like death. He said I was being offensive because I stood 10 feet away from him. Guy had the nerve to call my manager over, who then immediately stuck his hand up and said he wasn't interested in hearing his story, that he needed to leave and not come back until he took a shower. After this is when he started taking care of himself. I work in an ER in a low-income area. There was one that I'll never forget. She was a mid-40s obese hoarder who had decided it wasn't worth the effort to get out of her recliner for 2 weeks straight. She had a fridge within reach, so she wasn't hungry but was producing feces and urine the entire time without getting up to use the restroom or to clean herself. You could smell her down the hall with the door closed, and her behind was literally rotting away with pressure sores down to her bones. I worked on a dairy farm growing up in Wisconsin. If you don't already know, dairy farms smell horrible. I would always smell the farm at first when I showed up to work, and after a while you no longer smell it. The kids in high school made fun of how I smelled even though I wore clean clothes and took showers every night when I would come home from work. Fast forward to me coming home for the first time in a year after joining the army. I am going through some old clothes, and wow, the stench on those, even though they were washed, was quite strong. I threw them out. So yeah, nose blindness is def a thing. I used to work retail, and one day we had this woman come into the store who had not showered in months. She stunk the whole store up from just walking around. We had to ask her to leave due to hygiene. I will never forget that stench. It was like low tide and a dead body had been sitting around for a month. We had 2 regulars that used to come into our bar. In their later years of life, but enjoyed the atmosphere and loved chatting up anyone who would listen. Things started going south a few years back when we started getting some complaints that they would sometimes smell like urine. Then it dawned on me, I hadn't seen either of them get up and go to a washroom. Eventually we came to find out that instead of acting like normal members of society, they would come in, drink beer for a few hours, and just casually piss themselves while wearing diapers and not think anyone would notice. Girl I was friends with at university had been complaining of an itchy head for a couple of weeks. We all joked it could have been head lice, but none of us had any contact with children. Anyway, this girl was known for her lack of showering. We worked in the same restaurant together, and she'd frequently finish a shift, sleep in her uniform, and go back the next day without even a pat down with a wet wipe. Just to put it in context, one day in a lecture she scratched her head and a huge louse came out and walked across her paper. It was shocking, honestly. Later that day she's got delicing shampoo and a comb. I swear to God each time she pulled the comb out of her hair you couldn't even see the teeth. It was just alive and moving with lice. Still one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. I mean her head was literally crawling with lice. I went to a friend's house and she picked up poop from her cat's litter box with her hand, and proceeded not to wash her hands. I visited a friend's apartment and went to use the bathroom. There was no soap of any kind, not even shampoo. He told me he saw no need since he was living alone and they were just his own germs. My sister went to the same college that I went to. I visited her dorm room once and her suite-mate walked in. I was all the way across the room and she just walked into the common room on the other side, but I could smell her immediately. Apparently, she showered once a week. And by showered, I mean turned on the water, rinsed off without using soap, turned off the shower. She also refused to clean up anything when it was her turn, so apparently her lack of hygiene was consistent to other forms of cleanliness. I'm sure there's others I don't remember, but recently there was a 55-year-old coworker that did not believe in brushing his teeth. AKA never did it. He figured our ancestors never brushed their teeth, so he didn't need to either. Needless to say, talking to him was a very painful experience. I was a paramedic for several years and met several people with pretty bad personal hygiene. The worst one will always stick in my mind. This was a man who had an open wound on his foot that went untreated for an unknown amount of time. When I got to him, he had maggots crawling in and out of the wound and his socks and shoes had basically stuck to his feet and needed to be peeled off. He also smelled so bad that I had to wear an oxygen mask and run the oxygen at 10 liters a minute so that I didn't have to share the air with him in the back of my ambulance. I had a team member at my job who smelled really bad, like old sweaty laundry, B.O., bad breath, and dog musk all combined. At first I didn't notice it, but after a couple of weeks I was struggling to be near her for extended periods of time. It literally looked and smelled like she never showered or wore clean clothes, and she dressed pretty inappropriately for an office environment. We have a relaxed policy, but I'm talking like short tight skirts and very low-cut spaghetti straps with everything hanging out. Got a lot of swamp crotch odor on those particular days, not to mention she wore open-toed sandals constantly and both her big toenails were just like black scabs. Oof. It got so bad my boss took me out to have a word with me since so many people had complained to her about it and I had to give her a very awkward disciplinary meeting. She got fired not long after for a multitude of other reasons, but that one certainly didn't help. I used to work at a grocery store and a customer complained that while one of the cashiers was bagging her stuff, male, mid-20s, very overweight and disgusting and smelly, he leaned forward and his dandruff fell into her bag and she brought me the bag to return everything and replace the items with new ones, after talking to my manager, of course.